about the power of the tongue, which would be the power of our words and what we say, what comes out of our mouth. He says in verse 1 of chapter 3, my brethren, and this is to Christian people, to born-again believers, my brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. So don't think, oh boy, I'd love to have that position. I wish I could do that, whatever it may be that entails standing before people and instructing people or teaching people or preaching to people. And so he's saying be careful about that. It sometimes when you're sitting back and you're watching or listening, it looks easy and looks simple, and sometimes we think, well, man, I could do that. And as a matter of fact, I could do a better job of that. And a lot of churches have been started because somebody in a church thought they had a better idea and they could do it better. And then as they got into it, they found out it wasn't quite as easy as they thought. So he says, my brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we will receive greater condemnation. In many things we offend all. Now listen to this. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Well, I don't think any of us are perfect, but James was saying, if you have never said a hurtful word, if you have never offended anybody in your entire life, then you could be considered a perfect person. So that immediately eliminates all of us, because none of us are perfect, and we certainly have said things that has hurt someone or offended someone, and maybe we said it to someone else about that person. So he said, in many things, in a lot of things we do in life, we offend other people. And if we could have offended not in our words, then we would be rendered perfect, and that's not going to happen. And he goes on to say in chapter 3, verse 3, behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. And that's true. If you've ever ridden a horse, you put a bridle and a bit, and you make the horse go left or right or stop or whatever you want to do. He said also the ships, which though they be so great, are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. The governor would be the captain of the ship. Now, in James' day, they didn't have motorized boats like we have today, sailboats or people with oars and pushing the boat. But they had a little helm at the back of the ship, and you could turn that one way or the other and determine which way the ship would go. And he said those things are driven by strong winds, fierce winds, and yet they are turned by the small helm at the end of the boat, that whoever does that determines which way it'll go. And then he said, even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. So when you think about the tongue and the use of the tongue, a small member of the body, is not really that noticeable. We don't go around looking to see what people's tongues look like. So it's not something that we just pay attention to, but we know it's there. We know we have a tongue, and that tongue, James is saying what comes out of the mouth, the tongue helps to force that out. And it's a small thing. But remember a song years ago, a campfire song, it only takes a spark to get a fire going. Well, that's kind of what he's saying about the tongue. It's a small thing, but it can create a major problem. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. And he goes on in the rest of the chapter, to the end of the chapter, basically talking about the tongue and the use of the tongue, and good or bad, and how it comes out. But we control that. We have that power within us to say those things that hurt and cut, or say those things that help and cure. And so that is ours to do and to control however we want it to be. So in verse 4 and 5, and back in Proverbs 11, riches profit not in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivereth from death. So no matter how rich you may be, no matter how rich all of the billionaires and trillionaires of the world are, when it comes time to die, money doesn't help them at all. It does not cause him to live eternally. And the righteousness of the perfect shall direct his way, but the wicked shall fall by his own wickedness. And the word wicked that Solomon uses in chapter 11 is about lawlessness, that people who are lawless. And then in verse 7, he says, when a wicked man dieth, or a lawless man dieth, his expectation shall perish. Whatever a man or woman has hope for in their lifetime, whatever their plans are, whatever their schemes, whatever they're devising, and how they're planning to get where they want to be, that all of that dies when they die. It's left, and there's nothing there for it. So the expectation of that will perish with them. And the hope of unjust men perisheth as well. And then he says, the righteous, in verse 8, is delivered out of trouble, and the wicked cometh in his own stead, or his own place. So righteous people come out of trouble, and wicked people go into trouble. They take the place of that. And then in verse 9 he says a hypocrite. Now hypocrite comes from a couple of words actually. It literally meant to answer back. And it has to do with actors, acting. And when people perform plays, which they used to do a lot of that in old times, they had plays. They didn't have movies and movie theaters, so they did plays. And so the actors were playing a part. And when one person would say their line, that was the cue for the other person to answer back. And so it actually was called hypocrite. And of course now we hear that and know immediately there's something bad. But then it had to do with answering back. I say this and then you say that, and then we go through the play and it's all done with. But it was faked, because we were acting out a role or acting out a part. So he says that a hypocrite with his mouth destroyeth his neighbor, but through knowledge shall the just be delivered. And then down in verse 13, a talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. So a talebearer is one that pretty much makes up stuff. They just tell things on other people and make it sound good. And it's kind of like, I guess for lack of a better description, it's kind of like politicians. You know, they just tell you what they think you want to hear, most of them. Now, I'm not saying none of them are honest. I'm sure some are. But most of the time, they tell you what they want you to hear. And the state of Virginia is in a governor's race right now. The two main candidates, the ones that are leading, the one that has a slight percentile margin of lead, made a public statement. And he said this, that parents should have no say in the education their children get. And yet he's leading right now. It's amazing that people will accept that. That he's saying that if I get elected, I'm going to take away every parent in the state of Virginia. I'm going to take away their right to decide what their children receive in school. That have no say so at all. So a terrible thing, but you know, people still fall for that. There's a lot of people in Washington right now, congressmen and congresswomen, that I wonder how in the world did they get elected. Some of the stuff they say and some of the things that they come up with, it's dumbfounding that they would do that. Well, a state senator in the state of Pennsylvania has proposed a bill for the state of Pennsylvania that says that any man that turns 40 years old or has 3 children would no longer be permitted to have any more children. If he has 3 children, he can't have any more. If he turns 40, he can't have any more children. And he is proposing that bill in such a way that if you know of somebody that's 40 years old or they already have 3 children and they've not done anything about it, you can turn them in, and if that's verifiable, then they will pay you $10,000 to snitch on that person. And that's a proposed bill in the state of Pennsylvania. And I wonder, will that pass? I wouldn't be surprised at all if it does. So some of the things people come up with, it's just dumbfounding what they do and how they come up with those things. But a talebearer revealeth secrets, things he's not supposed to be telling. If somebody comes to you and says, now, I'm going to tell you this, but don't tell anybody else. And you say, okay, I won't. And then you go and tell it. Well, that's being a talebearer. So he says in the last part of that verse, he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. Keep that inside until the time is right. In verse 14, where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. He that is surety. Now, verse 15 is a little bit odd, a little strange how it's worded. He that is surety for a stranger shall smart for it, and he that hateth suretyship is sure. It's kind of a tongue twister, but the word surety, he that is surety, and that means a guarantee. He that has a guarantee for a stranger shall smart for it or suffer for it. So what he's saying is that if you're foolish enough to guarantee something to a complete stranger, then you'll be the one that'll suffer for it. They'll take you for everything you've got if you're not careful. So he that gives a guarantee to a stranger will be the one that suffers. And he that hateth suretyship is sure. Or if you don't want to do those kind of things and you don't like that kind of situation, then you are protected in the fact that you would not do that, or you're secure. Verse 17, the merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh. The wicked worketh a deceitful work, and that earns empty wages. The wicked worketh a deceitful work, or they don't get anything from what doing wickedness. But to him that soweth righteousness shall be a sure reward. As righteousness tendeth to life, so he that pursueth evil pursueth it to his own death. And so there's a payday that comes, payday someday. And then skipping down to verse 22, rather odd proverb. As a jewel of gold in a swine's snout, so is a fair woman which is without discretion. Now, the word discretion could be translated good sense. And then the word fair woman could either be a pretty woman or an attractive woman. So a jewel, if you would take a piece of gold jewelry, and put it in the snout of a pig, how much would that accomplish? What would be the value to that? You know what a pig does. They dig in the dirt with their snout and dig in the mud, and it'd be of no value at all to a pig. And so he's saying that it would be of no value at all to you and I if an attractive woman has no discretion. And the word discretion can be translated good sense. So you look at an attractive woman and say, man, she is so pretty. Look at that, man, what a beautiful woman. But she has no good sense. And so he's saying that it doesn't help her. Beauty goes skin deep, is the old saying. And so it's kind of like, well, why don't I just take my gold jewelry and put it in a pig snout? And what a waste of time and a loss of valuable merchandise. So in verse 24, 25, and 26, I'll tie those three together and listen to what he's saying. There is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendereth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. He that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse him, but blessing shall be upon the head of him that selleth corn. There's a little rhyme. I think it was a man named Bunyan that wrote it. It said, a man there was, though some did count him mad, the more he cast away, the more he had. He that bestows his goods upon the poor shall have as much again and 10 times more. And that's kind of what he's saying in those three verses. Verse 24, there is that scatter. There are people that just throw things away, and yet they increase. Well, but they're doing good with what they're getting rid of. If they're helping people, and that's the basic idea. He that scattereth, he's scattering handing out things to help other people. And he that does that, it comes back. If you give, it shall be given unto you in Luke 6:38. So he's saying that he that gives, then it'll be given back, that God will give back to the person that gives. And then there is that person that withholds more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. So if you have more than you need and you can help somebody else, but you don't do that, and you know that the amount that you have is more than what you need, and you really don't have a plan to use it, but yet you hold on to it, and you don't help someone else that you know could use it, then that leads to poverty. In verse 25, the liberal, and that's not in the sense that we think of liberals today. The word liberal in verse 25 is actually translated as generous. The generous soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself. So it's just saying if you give, then it comes back to you. In verse 26, he that withholdeth corn, the people shall curse him. So if you have more than you need, and you're not helping, using that to help other people, if people are hungry and they know you've got corn and you could have given it to them and you didn't, then the people will curse you because of that. But blessing shall be upon the head of him that selleth it. So if you do that to help other people, then it comes back to you, maybe tenfold, as a little rhyme said. You'll have much again and 10 times more. And then in verse 28, he that trusteth in his riches shall fall, but the righteous shall flourish as a branch. So if the only hope we have in life is material gain, if all that we can profit from and we can accumulate more and more and more, then it's useless, because it becomes, we fall, and the righteous shall flourish as a branch. Verse 30, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he that winneth souls is wise. And that is so true. The best thing that we can do in life here on earth is to try to lead other people to Christ. And in verse 31, behold, the righteous shall be recompensed in the earth, much more the wicked and the sinner. So think of this. If God's imparted judgment creates righteousness, and it does, how much more are the wicked going to pay for what they do? If God judges us as righteous people for what we do wrong or what we don't do that we should do, but if we're doing what we should and we're trying to do what is right, then we will be rewarded. The word recompense means that we'll be rewarded in the earth as we live here on earth, and much more the wicked and the sinner. They're going to pay double or triple or whatever it may be because of their wickedness, and they're going to pay. There's a payday someday. So with that in mind, let's take 2 or 3 minutes of silent prayer, and then we'll close. And